Let's identify some of the sources where this abuse can come, but let's also talk about the hope, because there is a way to overcome this, people. Hello, everybody, and welcome to podcast number 87 of the Gordon and Cherise Show. We are so happy to be back with you, and we just came out of a series about what I wish I would have known before I married a spouse in chronic pain. So that was such a powerful series. We've had great feedback from people, and I think it really speaks to the one who may feel very voiceless at times, the one who is carrying their loved one's pain without living in the actual physical pain. But there's a flip side to this story, Gordon.
Okay, Cherise.
And it actually, you know what I'm so encouraged about? If nobody else is listening to this, the guys on our team who are helping us, who are filming it, who are a part of, very important part of this podcast show, they gave us feedback after our last series that, hey, there's another topic that may really need to be discussed. And it's true. It resonated deep within both of us about what to do when pain leads to abuse. It's a very challenging topic. And this is actually going to become a series. It's in itself. There's too much ground to cover for just one podcast. But I have to say, Gordon, first of all, there's a lot of courage inside of you to even open up and be vulnerable about this topic as one who has lived in pain and one who has had to work through some of these issues. So we're going to talk from a level of experience and also teach people about better ways of living, even when their pain is trying to get the best of them or those around them. I want to be very clear about something before we go further with this, though, that if there is true abuse happening in the home, and we're talking domestic violence, domestic abuse, we encourage you to call the domestic abuse hotline. Seek a counselor. This is heavy stuff.
Yes, it is.
And we are not here to diagnose or diminish your own personal story. So we're setting this one up for more of what, I guess, the experience of our own life and what we find the feedback of a lot of people who live in chronic pain, what they're battling. So we want to take it from that level. Gordon, I've stolen the beginning of this show, so you have a lot to say. I know you do.
Well, we're taking the approach of what is the interaction within the family or the spouses or those closest to you, okay? So what do you really do when pain leads to what people would interpret as abuse?
Right.
And I think the first thing that we should do, we're not talking about simple offense, someone being offended. Mm-hmm. We're talking about abuse.
Right.
Okay? In other words, treating someone with cruelty or violence, especially regularly and repeatedly, and I'd like to add this, unpredictably.
Yes, that's a very good addition to the definition.
Because you're walking on eggshells. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I know for myself, and we can share this, no one is perfect when they walk into the arena of pain.
No.
So the person that's walking into that arena, this brand new world of pain, they're feeling like, what the heck? I did not ask for this. I did not ask for this pain. I did not ask for this erosion of my lifestyle. I didn't ask to deal with the biting pain that's in my joints and soft tissues and neurologic signs. Mm-hmm. I didn't ask for those things. And I'm having a hard time coping with them.
And I think that is so true because the pain has to go somewhere. Like, where do you, I mean, it's there. So there's an expression of pain that lashes out, that wants to lash out. It's that monster that we keep talking about.
Right. And we're all novices at first. Mm-hmm. We don't have expert abilities just to handle pain. Sure, we can white knuckle it and muscle our way up to dealing with pain and people start compartmentalizing their pains. But that pain builds up. And there's a part of bitterness and resentment that gets into the heart. And a lot of times, those people closest to us, it's easy to lash out. And not just on a superficial level. Lash out by tearing someone else down because you're already torn down dealing with pain and you don't mean to. It's not intentional, but then it becomes intentional. It becomes a normal habit. It's almost like neurological rewiring with pain. It becomes this new habit where you take it out on the people closest to you.
That's right. And you know what? I think the people closest to the one in pain have a period of time where they can endure. But
Sure.
if they're the punching bag chronically, and it becomes 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years of being somebody's punching bag who is in pain, I can't blame the spouses who have either given up or have said this isn't right. You're the one who is being abused. You are right to stand up. You are right to call it out. You're not wrong to admit that you're in pain too by the behavior of somebody that's hurting. And I found in my own marriage, Gordon, that a lot of times it's not the pain that bothers me. Sometimes it is the quick lashing out that pain can bring inside of you. And you catch it so quickly. But none of us are perfect. And consequently, I can lash out when I've carried...
Hold on.
No.
Yes, you can.
I can, because if I'm trying to fix it and I can't make it better, or if I'm holding it all in to try to be the brave one or the tough one or whatever ridiculous, heroic thing I'm trying to be at that moment, okay? When it's too much, I'll lash back out at you. And so we have to constantly monitor this in our life. This is not about being a Christian or not Christian. It's so interesting. Go ahead.
I wanted to mention that because a lot of times people can act spiritual. They can identify, and I'm not withdrawing from Catholicism or the Jewish faith or the Protestant faith or any particular denomination, but when someone's acting more spiritual and they're inappropriate in handling their pain or dealing with painful suffering and they lash out at others, it's even a double whammy.
Yes.
Because what's happening is their identity, the person that's in pain, even the spiritual person, their identity is smashed. And within their own conscious and subconscious, they're struggling to find that new identity, dealing with the bitterness and biting aspects of pain.
That's right.
And so what happens is
totally.
When they lash out, they tear down the identity and purpose of the people closest to them. And typically those people that are closest are partial or full-time caregivers.
Yes.
They're family members who are trying to help.
And they're exhausted.
And then they get abused.
Right.
Okay? And so I think with the hypocrisy of your faith, if you're not handling suffering well, it's even a double whammy for people.
I agree with that, Gordon.
But
wow, it reminds me, you wrote this down, of the verse in Proverbs 25:28 that says, if you live without restraint and are unable to control your temper, you're as helpless as a city with broken down defenses open to attack. So you're as helpless as that. So why add to the pain for the person even going through the pain? Why add a place of complete vulnerability to every other attack? Like the person in pain is opening themselves up to any attack that can come in because of a temper. They're breaking the city down, their defenses, they're breaking obviously down those things for the people around them. But the person they're actually going to hurt the very most is themselves. And maybe they want to, Maybe the person that's in pain feels like, well, I'm going down and everybody on the ship is going down with me. And there's this hopeless feeling that does come up with pain. But we're going to flip that script. I mean, this whole, the whole purpose of this is to let's identify some of the sources where this abuse can come, but let's also talk about the hope, because there is a way to overcome this, people.
Well, let's just speak of one nugget of hope before we move into the outbursts of pain, some of the root causes, okay?
Please.
I would just say this. When we're at our worst, God still remains good. So for that Christian who's showing hypocritical behavior and is really harsh on their loved ones, that's the time to sink literally into the connection that you have with an almighty God, because he remains good even when we're at our worst.
That's beautiful.
So I want people to remember that as we move forward, going through some of the root causes of why we have some of these outbursts of pain.
Right.
So let's hit number one.
Okay.
And this one is close to my heart.
It is. You've gone through it.
I've gone through it. And there are a lot of people that are going through it right now.
So explain this root cause.
Number one, medication use. And we're going to talk specifically about opioids. Okay, the use of opioids or narcotics for chronic pain. And anyone who's taking opioids, I just want to say this, you're at risk of developing an addiction. Right. In other words, when you first take those opioids, what happens is the opioids play a role in allowing you to have this feel-good feeling even though you have pain. Now, I know for myself...
Do you have firsthand experience with that?
I have firsthand experience. I was on morphine sulfate for a number of years. I went through methadone use. And the message that we're sharing today is not to be the doctor over the prescriptions for anyone dealing with opioids, but I can tell you how I felt.
How did you feel?
At first, it subdued the pain. And then after a while, it wasn't like an addiction like you would see with someone with heroin. But for me, I was taking it, doctor's orders, trying to be compliant with everything I was dealing with.
Plus it was almost required through your disability.
It was almost required through my pain management program.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so taking those medications, high doses for a prolonged period of time, you start developing a tolerance to it. And I just felt numb and depressed. And there wasn't any new energy in my thoughts. There was this sense of existence. And then I had other problems. For instance, typical problems you get. Not having a bowel movement for 5 days, or scratching. You're feeling itching and nerve sensations on your skin at different points, and not being able to get that real sound sleep. So the inside of your body feels extremely incoherent. And then when you develop the tolerance, this is where addiction comes in. Okay, those endorphins that are released, that give you that feel-good feeling. Pretty soon, you need more. You need more to get back to that initial feeling. You develop the tolerance, so you need higher doses and more frequency use of opioids, and then you get into this whole big loop. And the point is, you still have chronic pain.
On top of that, you're going up and down like a yo-yo.
Absolutely.
So, Gordon, how would that translate into the whole topic of abuse? Like, how did it make you treat other people during that time?
Because you're not yourself. So you get fits of anger, you get fits of rage, you're completely misunderstood. Your emotional net, the way you process life, okay, you can have thoughts, which is the language of the brain, and then these emotions are the language of the body. Well, your body's in pain, your emotional network just shows pain, okay? And so after a while, it's easy to say, here's who I am. I identify and label myself as someone who needs medications, and I'm just a pain victim.
Right.
And then you start taking it out on people, and you don't even mean to. You're more short-tempered, okay? You're more intolerant. And taking it a level deeper for me, I wasn't necessarily abusive towards people. I've had a few outbursts, okay?
I can count more than 2.
Well, thank you, Cherise. Okay? I'm easy on myself.
You are.
It's
That's probably a good thing.
It's part of God's grace. But
Yeah.
here's the deal. I became more critical of those who were healthy. I saw myself in my mindset and the way I was emotionally processing what I was thinking and how my body was responding because my body was broken. I would look at someone in a healthy status and say, boy, if I were in that state, I sure would not act like this, or I would achieve this, or you should have discipline to do this because I couldn't do it anymore.
What I'm hearing is it gave you pride in your own suffering. It exalted you above people who were healthy because you were judging them.
You don't mean to, but
Right.
I was critical and judging people, and I had a hidden covetous nature. So that covetous nature to be healthy again, where I could not attain it, I saw it in other people, and so what happens? You start taking it out on other people.
Right. Oh, Gordon.
You-
Honest
you-
confession, but this is going to help a lot of people.
Well, it's true. It's absolutely true from experience, from what we see with the Word of God, from not understanding the meaning behind painful suffering, having your identity completely smashed.
Right.
You just get to a point of saying, hey, listen, I'm empty. I don't know where I'm going. I'm helpless.
You got to that point,
Absolutely.
and I would say this, and I was married to you when you were at the beginning of our marriage, you
Yes.
were on morphine. And, sometimes you have to, obviously, when you're having an acute attack or you go in for surgery, there's prescriptions that you do. I mean, for you or a fresh patient of, multiple fusions or surgeries, there is medication, and it's good for a season. It's good for a period of time. But I think what I understand is prolonged medication use, even beyond the acute stages, just to make somebody, quote, be able to cope. It's something obviously you and your doctor have to work with. But your body also, I observed you waking up to, like, you got just a little bit more strength when you admitted you were at the bottom. Honestly,
Right.
I noticed that it's like this strength came into you of, I can't stay. It's like you realized where you were finally. It was like you finally got a map at, whoa, I'm way off course. I'm way over here. And I know that I'm supposed to be over here.
And I didn't realize how far I drifted from my own center.
And so, Gordon, when you were able to stop the did a doctor tell you to stop the meds? Or did you rise up and say,
Let's just take this approach. The goal was not to take medications any longer.
and
I would rather feel some of the freshness of pain, unless it was debilitating like a kidney stone on a short-term basis. I was determined to still live out my life because I wanted to renew my mind, okay? And I wanted to move into that new person. Because when you do take those opioids repeatedly over time, your body slows its production of endorphins. And that same dose of opioids stops triggering the strong flood of good feelings. That means tolerance. That's what's happening. And you want more and more and more and more. And when does it stop?
And again, you were treating people, you weren't yourself, so you weren't treating people like your normal self would treat people.
Right. But remember what I said earlier in the podcast. Here's what really helped me during all of this. When we're at our worst, and for those who have a belief system in God, a strong faith that seems a little weakened because their endorphins are down, okay, and medication's taking over, there's a reality that God still remains good. I had to rely on the goodness of God even when I could not see it, feel it, or act accordingly.
You're right.
I had to start from ground zero. So for me, this is not for everyone, but this is for some people. Okay? Reducing medication use or potentially getting off of medications once you consult your doctor is extremely helpful to begin that approach to renew your mind. It will slow down those outbursts that you have about pain, and it's going to be helpful to regain health relationships with the family. Let's hit number 2, Cherise.
I mean, and we're still on root causes of outburst of pain.
Yes.
Which leads to abuse. And these root causes, this next one, I think it hits me so deeply because you and I both have experienced traumas from our childhood, right? This root cause, you wrote it down.
I think everyone has experienced some type of childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I'm not saying they didn't come from a stable family, but we've all dealt with imperfect parents, imperfect siblings, imperfect in-laws. That's part of the nature of the family structure.
And, I'm so grateful we are now in a society, a time in our culture where it's not taboo to talk about these traumas, because when you and I were growing up and when our parents were growing up and the generation before them, especially our parents and their generation, nobody talked about things. It was just stuff it, ignore it. That's not, living. That's not faith. It's not being even honest with yourself. But, obviously the childhood trauma, what I see is that when a pain condition then is coupled with an undealt trauma, it's like an explosion.
Absolutely. And so what happens when we have childhood traumas, and some people have extremely traumatic childhood traumas, okay? What happens is this. You have prolonged stress loads in your life for long periods of time. So that wiring in your brain always goes back to the old. It goes back to the survival mode. It understands how many endorphins are going to be kicked off. It goes back to a risk-adverse environment. And so you tend to hide behind things. And studies have shown, that people who have had longer-term toxic stress loads from their childhood also develop chronic pain issues in their adulthood.
Isn't it funny that I said it earlier, the pain has to go somewhere. And
Absolutely.
Stuffing trauma, the pain can hide so well in the body. I've seen it. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score that shows it medically and scientifically. It's incredible.
Yeah. According to Harvard's Center on the Developing Child, the impacts of experiencing repeated incidences of toxic stress as a child persist far into adulthood and lead to lifelong impairments in both physical and mental health. So I want the audience to think about this. Okay? These toxic stresses which occur can cause damage, crucial damage to your neural connections in your brain and the way you process things. So if you're growing up and you have these impacted neural connections and sequences and processes that have occurred, and it's almost like I've got a damaged computer, and you try to process on a damaged computer later in life, you're bringing in unhealth, disease, and illness into your future. And the studies also show that it's easier to lash out at people who are closest to you. Caregivers go experience the trauma that you've carried into the future from your childhood.
You know what's interesting about it too is that I believe pain triggers the child, like the 5-year-old or the 8-year-old that trauma happened to. When it's undealt with trauma, the person in pain goes back to that that
Yes,
age.
absolutely.
And they go back to that age, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with an adult person who is in tons of physical pain, who is acting like a child, literally manifesting, and a mean one, maybe a child
or
who
a stubborn one.
a stubborn one, a child who is demanding who is really, that child is lashing out in their own pain.
Right.
And so I think it is a huge thing. Nobody can help if an accident happens to their body. And nobody may have been able to help a trauma that happened when they were a child. But the one thing that's amazing is the ability to bring out something new and live a different way, have a different mindset. You can't change the past, but you can sure change where you're going.
Absolutely. I want you to think of this, Cherise. And we're repeating some of our thoughts so people can really let this absorb into their bodies. Your brain is a record of your past. And when you think about your problems, then you're really thinking about your past. Even if you have that new injury that kicks off chronic pain. And then you have an emotion associated with your past traumas and problems. That's when you begin to feel anxious, guilty, unhappy, sad, depressed, disappointed. Your body also reacts accordingly. Your body is very smart. It reacts quickly and accordingly to what the neuroscience is in your brain and the way you've emotionally processed things from the past. So a lot of times the focus is always me. How do I get out of that unstuck portion of the past? Even though I have pain, it's me. How am I relevant? And then the person close to you, the closest to you, even though you may love them, they're not as relevant as what you're dealing with a broken past.
You're right.
Okay? So their behaviors, no matter what they do, no matter how good they are or how well-intended they are, they get smashed. They get smashed by someone who's dealing with difficulties.
But Gordon, this can be turned around. You've seen it.
I've seen it.
You've lived it. You've seen it.
I have seen it. Let's do this. Let's go to number 3, because on the next podcast, this one is more of a subject matter of the what. What are causes? What are examples? How is the brain working? How are emotions happening? The next is going to be about how to make changes. So let's hit number 3, quick-tempered or lashing out reactions because of pain.
Okay.
Unfortunately, those who receive those blunt forces of abusive pain from the chronic pain sufferer, the people that are doing it are actually the closest people. We mentioned that throughout this podcast. It's the spouses, the partners, the family members, the deeper friendships. And we know this, when pain is left alone to its own devices, it can raise up that ugly pain monster within a finger snap.
Right.
And create this vicious cycle of downright abuse against someone else, especially the caregiver. Nonetheless, I want to state this for the podcast. Pain is never an excuse to abuse another human being, or if we want to even take it even further, an animal, such as a pet, a dog or a cat or fish or anything else. Abuse is not to be tolerated. For instance, like opioid medication creates tolerance. We do not want abuse to move into the tolerance range.
You're right about that.
And then when those spouses and those caregivers and those sons and daughters and the people closest in the family have endured that chronic pain and abuse for 5 to 10 for several years, it's not something that needs to happen to the point where they become the ones who are pain victims over the long term.
And I firmly believe that it's part of why there is such a high divorce rate.
Sure it is. It's a contributing factor without doubt.
Yeah. So there is a way to get it, to not just get a handle, but to slay that pain monster.
Right. We're coming to the close of today's podcast. So let's kind of wrap it up. What thought do you have today about the what? Okay, in other words, the root causes, examples of what we're having. What would you like to say?
I want to say that anybody who is really living in critical pain right now, I believe that the person that you need to forgive first is yourself. And wrap your arms around yourself. Allow that you may feel absolutely ugly and unlovable because maybe you've had such a long time of lashing out at yourself and other people. Maybe you're just, the friction in you might be great because you are so dry and you are so weary. But I really pray that you will, this podcast is about kind of waking up to it.
Yes.
It's about understanding it. It's not about condemning yourself. And people, when you are exhausted because you're the spouse or the one that's receiving this, let it settle in and let this be an awareness for you too. Remember this, love covers a multitude of sins.
Yes, you're right.
And it's the thing in our marriage that has brought us back, both of us, when we are off course, brought us back to the center. And it hasn't been easy or pretty. Sometimes it looks really messy in those places that other people aren't watching publicly. It's just, it can be messy. But I'll tell you, there is a center. And I pray that you first become aware that there even is a center. And with God's grace and a community behind you, we believe in you.
Yes. Very good. I'm going to give a thought for the day, and I'm going to focus it on the root causes. And the root causes that we just mentioned, the 3 or 4 root causes of why people have outbursts of pain. The fact remains that we are not validating that this is okay to do.
Right.
But we're also recognizing that you're human, and it's happening within the interplay between human beings every day. But there's a point where boundaries need to be established. Mm-hmm. There's a point where abuse, emotional abuse especially, cannot prevail into who we all are becoming.
Absolutely.
Now, we might have abuse and pain and suffering and helplessness as part of our narrative in our story, in our own individual lifestyles, okay? And then it's going to be woven into one big story someday. I would just encourage you, don't give up. Still have patience. There is some answers that are coming in the next podcast of what you can do. So that's my thought for the day.
Thank you so much.
So how would you like to conclude by how do people get connected with us, honey?
Okay, so our website, gordonandcherise.com.
I love the website.
It'll get you plugged in to our community and sign up. Get a free intro to our book, Pursue Real Hope. And very importantly as well, subscribe on YouTube. We would love it if you would subscribe. We're growing our subscribers on that, and especially become a part of our Better Living community on Facebook, because that is a private group. It is a safe space, and we have it as a private group so that people are able to feel more open and free. And if there is the need to reach out or go a little deeper on some of these topics, we just want people to have that safety and freedom, that it's a space where you'll be heard and prayed for. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and look forward, Cherise, to the next podcast.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next week.
See you then.